Nicholas Jaquinot, my guest today on Tête-à-tête, is an actor, but he's come to acting through a circuitous route. Nick started out by studying at Swinburne University and did a 3-year course in filmmaking before moving on to train as an actor. Nick, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
How did you get interested in acting in the first place?
It's probably a familiar story for a lot of young actors, but it's kind of just finding like, oh, this is how I'll get some attention when I was a kid. I think I really found it in high school when I found out, oh, this is great, I'm on the stage doing voices and making people laugh. But I think it really kind of caught on for me when I was very young. I grew up watching Jim Carrey and Robin Williams, and I would imitate them. I'd imitate Ace Ventura, and for an audience of my parents, basically. And I would reenact these fight scenes using like the couch cushions as enemy soldiers. Is there an audience around? Yeah, cool. It's great. Mm.
So you were involved in theatre in secondary school?
Sort of mid to late secondary school. I think early on I didn't have a lot of confidence when I was on stage, because most of what we did was at our schools were musicals. Okay. And I am right at this moment, I'm in singing lessons, hand on heart, I'm in singing lessons. But as of that moment, I was not a good singer. Once we had the opportunity to actually do dramatic plays, doing theatre studies and drama later in high school, I just really loved it. And drama class as well, when we were doing, let's do a comedy improv, let's do a dramatic improv, all right, we're working on monologues now. And, I think I got a taste for it then and just really enjoyed it.
But then you took yourself to behind the camera.
I was just always interested in films, especially, when the Lord of the Rings films came out, and I thought how amazing that was. I got very into the New Hollywood era, and also watching kind of those classic films, kind of to say, for one reason, to say that I did, and to have that mean that I knew about films more than anyone else did. But also because I found out that, oh, these are iconic films. I should watch that because I'm into films. And I think just the love of watching them made me want to pursue making them.
What did you learn in your 3 years at Swinburne? What was important to you about what you did? Was
probably to do with writing. I found the form that I write in now is still, with some tweaks, still very much the form that I learnt to write in then. It's kind of about keeping things simple early on, to know the plot structure, forming the plot structure early, then kind of developing the characters within that, developing kind of themes within that. Learnt since Swinburne to fall in love with a first draft even less. I did learn how to speak to actors. We were very lucky at Swinburne that we had a teacher who was working with us, who has since gone on to have the beginnings of a very successful directing career. She taught us directing, and she brought in actors from 16th Street, which is the first time I'd ever heard of 16th Street as well, to help us workshop our scripts and also to help us learn how to speak to actors. And I'd found because I'd done theatre studies and I'd done those, Little NIDA short courses and the St Martin's short courses, that I had some knack for talking to them. So just having the confidence to know that, oh, if I'm in the director chair, I can speak their language even now, before I'd done any actor training myself. And because my focuses really were writing and directing, I think just having that sort of foundation of confidence and then foundation of technique was probably the best thing that I got out of Swinburne. And then, of course, being surrounded by people who were, have roughly the same goals or roughly the same ambitions as you is very handy. One of my best friends, I met him in Swinburne, and since then We've talked ad nauseum about films, film theory, which is another thing that I studied. I studied film history and the cultural impact behind, you know, genres and time periods in film history.
How fascinating.
Yeah, it was amazing. I actually would say that there is a teacher, Mark Freeman at Swinburne, is one of the most knowledgeable film and TV theory teachers. He definitely helped me learn the value of knowing about, you know, this is sort of where this particular film that you're watching that was released in 2019 or 2018, this is where it comes from. You can draw a line to, oh, this technique that they're doing here was first invented then, and they're using this camera technique because they're trying to flip a tradition on its head or something like that.
So the film theory is really about placing a particular film within the context of its film history, but also in terms of the community and society that it sits in.
You can see definitely, I'll use the New Hollywood era as an example, and there's an amazing book that I think everyone who loves film should read called Easy Riders, Raging Bulls by Peter Biskind. I think everyone should read that book because it gives in great detail not just the kinds of films that were being made, but the people who were making them and the energy of that time. It was one of the most crazy, revolutionary times in film history when the studios were losing money and losing power, and individual people out of film schools, which were a very new thing at that time, were coming up. American society was sort of in a state of upheaval. And so out of that, one of the first New Hollywood films, which was Easy Rider, it's genre into itself, you know, and it implemented the drug psychedelic culture that was coming up in America into a film.
And how do you think that has influenced your writing?
Knowing what structures work in film, knowing what film is actually also capable of showing. I think that having seen so many almost genre-defying films, old films, new wave films, dare I say structureless films, because there are definitely some films out there that are kind of almost meditations on an emotion. Just having experienced and knowing that that can be done, and knowing then historically what the responses to those sort of films are, I think that really helps to be brave in writing. Knowing that you have much more freedom in what you can put down on paper and what you can then show as a result.
So after you finished Swinburne, you'd already had an introduction to 16th Street. Is that what made you go to 16th Street?
Absolutely. Swinburne was great once they started to kind of have this relationship with 16th Street, they really did buy into it, because we had posters up when the master teachers were coming down. We had them when Larry Moss came to town. And now I had been hearing from the actors who I had cast, all from 16th Street, barring I think one, in my third year film, my final film, which I wrote and directed. It's called Burn Bright and it's on my Vimeo page if anyone's daring enough to have a look. It was a different time. But they had all been from 16th Street, and Larry Moss was in town during my production week. So my lead actor was auditing, and he was coming back from auditing to do some night shoots, and he was telling me about how great it was to just sort of sit in and listen. And I thought to myself, you know what, I'm going to go see this Larry Moss guy. He's coming to town again. And so I went and I audited, and thank God a couple of people who had auditioned for my short film were waiting in line. So I, you know, even though I didn't give them the roles, they were still willing to let me sit with them. You know, then started watching Larry work with actors for 4 days straight. I audited the whole thing. And by the end of it, I was just so overwhelmed by everything that he gave and everything that the actors gave. I thought, yeah, no, this is not going to be able to wait another 7, 8 months. This has to happen now. So I started working on a monologue, and I said, no, full-time is what I got to do, and I want to do it at 16th Street because they're bringing guys like Larry out, and I want to work with him.
One of the joys of 16th Street is that you get to work with a whole range of different techniques. They bring in teachers or have teachers that really focus on different styles of working. What were your what are your preferred styles? What of all of the things that you've learned at 16th Street, what types of methods do you like to use?
I don't think that I have a single method that I would ascribe to. If there is a method I ascribe to, it's the Nicholas Jaquinot process, you know. And I think the great thing about 16th Street in how it teaches all these different processes is that it doesn't necessarily tell you that this one will work for you. And if this one doesn't work for you, then the next one will show you will work for you. One of these will work for you, and then that's all you'll need to do. It's more like, here are all the techniques or all the processes, and each of these processes has techniques within them, and you can just pick and choose which ones you want and test them out and see what works. So I would definitely say that my process is an amalgam of all the teachers I've had and then an amalgam of all the work that I've done as well. Because I think the only way that you really do develop a process is by getting out of the classroom and actually testing them out and working. Carl Ford, one of the teachers we work with, said this to us: you will not read the Susan Batson book Truth and be able to do Susan Batson technique, but you may get a few things out of it that you can apply, you know. And I think every teacher does that. I think you really have to work with if you want to master a single method, say for example, you want to learn Stella Adler's method of process of acting, then you're going to have to find some way of transplanting your soul into her body because it's her process. She's teaching you her process, but it's your own version. Marlon Brando was a version of Stella Adler's technique.
Since you've finished 16th Street, how are you keeping your acting chops active between projects?
I think that, you know, you always sort of want to be ready for when something pops up. And I think the best way to be ready is to keep the growth happening, because then you can take advantage of a real opportunity to, you know, improve the toolkit. But I've seen some great movies. But I've watched some, you know, great interviews, or I've just hung out with filmmakers and actors.
Is
and
writing one of the things that you do to keep yourself?
It can be, definitely. I've said in the past that writing can keep me sane, because it is a chance for you as an actor to step out of the one focus of your character and actually step out and see a story fully, and then get to have the joy of kind of creating your own story. So another way to kind of keep the instrument sharp and to keep improving is to actually start to add things to the toolkit that might not necessarily be as obvious as voice or movement or going to a Shakespeare class. I've never learned how to properly hold and fire a gun, and that pops up a lot.
Yes.
One of the things I'm doing, because I'm encountering in auditions now that I'm doing, particularly for theatre, particularly for Shakespeare and classic plays, is that, you know, give us a little 1-minute a cappella song. And as I may have mentioned earlier, I'm not the most confident singer in the world. I thought to myself, well, the best thing I can do then is start singing lessons. And a fellow actor who I was in a play with gave me the name of a great teacher, and I've been working with her now for just a few weeks, very early days. You can already tell, like, oh, this is adding tools to improving the voice as well. This isn't just, oh, yeah, I'll do singing lessons so I can do a musical. No, this is helping your voice, helping me learn the musculature of how resonance and breath and all these things go together. To work in this industry, really, theatre and film industry in a creative sense, it can be very terrifying. It can be full of rejection at times. It can be very deflating. I think finding those things that are related, but maybe not necessarily, you know, like first cousins, maybe even a second or third cousin to the craft itself, finding those things so that when you do them for 15 minutes to an hour, whatever it is, walk through a gallery, read a book, watch a great movie, things like that, that then when you step out of it, you say, there's the energy back. It might only be for a few hours, because it's hard to stay at that high level all the time. You know?
And it's especially hard because it's just you. I mean,
Yeah.
so much of what we do as actors, you do at home in your room, and it's very hard to keep the energy up and to keep the commitment up. So I think those are very valuable tools.
And I think as well, that's why it's so vital to not just go to class and not just go to class and not just do the work on set and in rehearsals. But if you're doing both of those things, you're constantly engaging in the community, you know? So if you've got, one class a week and then the rest of the time you're at home by yourself, if you're not getting work, audition for some independent theatre or hang out with your mates and just talking about it. But engaging with other artists who are in a state of being inspired, and snatching a bit of that energy away. Because the community is... Community's important. I mean, there is always an element of the community that is, he got that role. Man, I would have been good in that. Why didn't I get an audition? There's always a bit of that. But at the end of the day, I think, it would be amazing if we could all succeed.
Now, you've mentioned Shakespeare a couple of times. How has Shakespeare come into your life?
Shakespeare has come into my life. It's very interesting. It's sort of in a similar way to acting as a whole, where without it being a kind of obvious moment, it's more of being like, hey, this is nice. There's something natural here. That's interesting. And then sort of leaving it for a while and then having it come back. In high school, I would say I'm one of the only people in my high school year who would read a Shakespeare play in English and know what was going on, because the language is quite challenging for people who aren't used to it. But there was something about reading it out in class, when, let's be honest, in high schools, the majority of people are kind of taking the piss out of it. This is weird, it sounds weird, they're talking about fairies and there's a clown now and this is silly. There's something about the stories that I was like, I know what is happening plot-wise.
So you got involved with the Australian Shakespeare Company?
I got involved with a school called Shakespeare and Company, and they're based out of Lenox, Massachusetts, and it's a school founded by Tina Packer, the late great Dennis Krasnick, Christian Linklater and Kevin G. Coleman. It wasn't really a school, it was a theatre company. And they had a property, the Mount, in Lenox, Massachusetts, in the Berkshires. And I think it was Edith Wharton's property or something like that. She let them muck around and do theatre there. And so a friend of mine had done the course there, the 1 month January intensive, which they're known for. And at 16th Street, they brought a great couple of teachers over from Shakespeare and Company, Dave Demke and Jane Nichols. And they taught us for a week. And after I was done with that, I was speaking to Dave and to Jane and saying, you've got to come over in January. And so I made the decision to go over and study Shakespeare for about a month and a half, 6 days a week, 16-hour days. Oh, wow. Doing voice, movement, clowning, stage combat, text, and then at the end a showcase of scenes. And I got to do a scene from The Merchant of Venice, the casket scene. I did that in 2018, in January 2018, and it was just an amazing experience. Cold as hell, minus 23 degrees Celsius on the first day. And that was
so what have you taken away from that experience?
A lot of what I got from it was finding sort of joy in doing these older pieces, doing Shakespeare, And it really helped demystify a lot of things about Shakespeare for me, especially as concerned to how verse is why it's the way it is, how breath and verse work together, how punctuation is not what you think it is, that the full stops in the verse are actually the ends of the lines, and then there's the breath, and then you go to the next line. It's not necessarily where the full stops are. We had a large group. There were about 60 of us, I think. Wow. And there was a teaching group of about 20. And it was round the clock we're together. We were living on campus. And the teachers were basically living on campus as well. Everyone had done theatre. Everyone loved doing theatre and to varying degrees and loved Shakespeare. And being in that environment, it kick-started a pretty huge 2018 for me. It gave me more confidence in my voice and my body, because in the 4 weeks of work, after week 2, could already feel how different things were and hear how different things were.
Kicked off a great year. What happened in 2018 for you then?
2018 was the first year so far in my career where I could say that I made the lion's share of my financial gains came from acting.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
That is really fantastic.
It was amazing being able to say that I think I only took one unpaid job. And that was a passion project. One of my closest friends, I would say my little sister, but we're not actually related, had written with one of her housemates who's a director, a short film. And I asked them, like, I want to be in this because I want to act with you and I want to, work with him and all that. And that was the only unpaid job I took. And all the rest of it was paid, some of it quite well paid.
You've mentioned that you're writing a film. Can you tell us about, I think you said you're up to draft 7 on your film.
Yeah.
How did you, tell us about the drafting process and where it's up to now and what you're hoping to do with that piece.
So the film as it stands now is a comedy horror, which is...
It's a great genre.
It's a great genre, and it's probably the only way I could write a horror, because I don't watch horror movies because I'm an absolute scaredy cat. I hate jump scares. I just hate them.
So the film would be full of them, right?
Oh God, so many. I don't have to watch the thing after it's made. So it's a comedy horror now, but it began as a much more serious kind of sci-fi-esque horror set in far north Queensland. Monsters, very much inspired by John Carpenter remake of The Thing. And I had learnt from a writer. So he'd done a seminar at 16th Street and he had said, I write the first draft and then I find the through line of what I'm trying to say and I throw everything out and I keep that through line and then I write from there.
How interesting.
Yeah, and that has been an amazing thing to start to apply to my own writing. Yeah. And it came into effect when I wrote a short film, which is as yet unproduced. Hopefully we'll film it at some point. Being able to just hone in on what exactly am I trying to tell here? What story am I trying to tell? Because even in this, serious horror film that I'd written, there was a through line of, here's a guy who doesn't know why his girlfriend has broken up with him and he's committed to finding out why. From that first draft, I found that. And I also had someone tell me, like, mate, this should be a comedy, this is hilarious, which was not my intention. I think it was to do with the monster at the time being like a giant mushroom creature. But I threw away that first draft.
Lost the mushroom.
Lost the mushroom creature. It's still a forest monster, but it's not made of mushrooms anymore. I have a reason for that, but I won't go into it now. I took that through line, reintegrated into a new story of a group of people with still the same kind of character makeup, heading to a festival, getting lost in the woods, being terrorised by this monster on their way there. All they want to do is get to this, bush doof, this music festival, and dance around. And all he wants to do is to get his ex-girlfriend to pick him instead of this other guy.
Right.
And then my process from there is very much throw everything, including the kitchen sink, into it. So at the end of, maybe 4 or 5 drafts into it, and I'd have like 140 pages, which is far too long. And then begins the process of, cutting things out, saying more with less, partly why Swinburne, learning film theory and having screening series at Swinburne, we could watch these films and find out what makes them so great, was learning just how much you can say in a visual medium.
Yes.
Anything at all.
It's such a lesson, isn't it?
And I find it's a whole, like, you can generally tell when a film is not doing too well for the audiences. It's generally because it's saying too much.
So where is the draft now?
It's been a while since I've written another draft because of acting commitments. But right now it's hosted up on the Blacklist website. I'm hosting it up there so I can have other industry professionals have a look at it and give me some feedback. And
So tell us about the Blacklist website.
so it's a kind of a database where screenwriters can host their scripts on the site, whether it be a screenplay for a feature film or a TV pilot. And you pay a small fee to host it each month, and you can pay a bit extra to have an industry professional read it and give you feedback. But it's there and it's available for other people on the site to download it, have a read of it and get feedback. All copyright and IP stuff is all covered by them and everything. So they have a time of year when they release the top 100 unproduced, unoptioned screenplays.
And so that top 100 is voted by the number of people who've looked at it, or how do they
I
choose
believe
it?
so. I'm not 100% sure, to be
You're just
honest.
waiting for yours to come up and then you'll know.
Yeah, absolutely. I put it up there last week and it's got an almighty 0 reads so far. So
We haven't talked about your theatre experience, Nick. What have been the things that have been most exciting for you in the theatre?
I think one of the most exciting experiences I had was at the end of the course in Massachusetts at Shakespeare and Company. We were given the chance to kind of showcase what we learnt for each other and for the faculty. And that was a really amazing experience to kind of do a scene from Shakespeare. Probably the most rewarding, if not taxing, experience was when I actually produced as well as acted in a production of Gruesome Playground Injuries. It's an amazing play. It's a two-hander, so 2 people.
God, that's tough.
Yeah, and me and the other actor, we both started this theatre company, New Character Productions. So it was myself and Katerina Viva-Scholler, who I went through full-time at 16th Street with. She brought the play to me. I'd heard of it. I'd seen scenes done from it. We threw ourselves headlong into it. By the end of it, I felt like I had lost weight, I'd lost money, but I knew that I had given myself the gift of, like, just having done this thing, having put this thing up and having done this amazing play. Then I've done one other play since then for Fringe Festival last year. I was actually playing the writer himself, Bill Marshall, for the play Actor Cracked. And he had written his experiences with schizophrenia as a writer and his experiences in the public health system into this play. Playing someone who begins, hustling actor to having a mental breakdown, to being delusional, going through the public health system, and then coming out the other side of it, still on the edge, still, broken but not dead. Was a really intense experience. It showed me what I would want to work on for the future. And it also showed me how unique an individual the prep can be right before I walk on. The character that I was stepping into and the world that character was stepping into. I'm pacing back and forth like a caged animal. And then in this other one, it was I'm not listening to music. I'm just sort of being with my own thoughts in silence. I'm listening to what's around me and that's it.
How did you decompress? How did you do self-care in the play?
For the early stage of the rehearsal, I was still putting the finishing touches on the 7th draft of my script, so the writing really came into it in the first couple of weeks. Having other projects that I was involved with was taxing. So I'd learnt that was a bad idea.
Yep.
So self-care was difficult in the lead up because I was on stage for an hour and 40 minutes non-stop. They had to add a scene just to get me off there so I could have a break. And I'm on there moving, jumping around, sweating bullets. So a lot of the self-care I did for myself then. I knew that I was going to be exhausted all the time. I knew that that was just going to be part and parcel for the process of this character. So I, spent a lot of time trying to just stretch the body out, keep the body from locking up physically, tried to keep the voice work, and just maintain that so that when I was out there, I wasn't going to pull anything or have anything lock up.
And the physical work that you were doing, that physical stretching and so on, probably helped emotionally too, because I imagine that was going to be a hard one to let go of emotionally every night.
Absolutely. And when they talk about emotions transforming themselves into kind of physical pains, it's definitely true. I remember having, back pain, neck pain. For me, in the process leading up to the actual event, it's almost like self-maintenance. There's always, if I'm playing a character like that, I know that some part of me has got to be a little bit off to play a guy who's very way off. So that the self-care and the healing really comes into effect afterwards. So in the lead up to the play itself, I was already thinking about, okay, I got to take some time here. I've got to just not deal with anything of this kind of work nature here. I've got to give myself up. And one of the things I did, which was one of the best things I think I chose to do, was I did a 2-day workshop with an acting teacher, with Kim Farron when she came down here towards the end of the year. And just as a way of saying, I separated myself from the craft for about a month to recover, or a couple of weeks really to recover. Now I've got to get the re-inspiration going, because I know that the healing will not be complete until the motivation is there to do it again.
Oh, I think that's a really important point. Really important point.
Yeah.
What's next for you, Nick?
So I've got a few things going on. There is a feature film that is shooting shortly. There is another feature that I'm involved in the production side as well as acting, which we're hoping to shoot in August, which is a great Australian story, I think, that we have on our hands. And there's another one which is a feature film. I'm helping to workshop the script a bit. So it's sort of those 3 projects, hopefully all of them occurring this year.
That's great. Yeah. So 2018 was a watershed year, and 2019 shaping up to be very exciting as well.
More water, more shed.
Nick, thank you so much for being with us today on Tete-a-Tete. I really appreciated your time.
Cheers.
I've been with Nicholas Jaquinot. Thank you very much for watching Tete-a-Tete.